Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, even though the video goes up and you might be watching it in the morning. I don't know, it's a video, but welcome to Betwixt the Books, and we are doing another reading roundtable. It's been a couple months since we've done one. We took a little bit of break with the new year, but we're back. This time, this video was originally supposed to come out like the 1st of March or the 2nd of March, like one of the first days. So we gave ourselves the theme of either celebrating Black History Month and reading something in February by a Black author, or by celebrating Women's History Month, which is this month. So it could be Black or women or both. Doesn't matter. It's just that we're straddling two big history months and we wanted to sort of celebrate that in this reading roundtable. So you're probably going to get a smattering of all of that throughout the video. Welcome if this is your first time. Hi, we're Betwixt the Books. I'm hoping that you've been here before. That we've been doing this for a little while, but we bring on some of our bookish friends to talk about the things that we've been reading. So you're going to get a wide smattering of everybody's different likes and dislikes, but we're going to go around, introduce ourselves, talk a little bit about what we normally like to read. So maybe you can get an idea if this is the first time you're seeing some of these other folks on our channel. And then we'll just talk about some books that we read or are currently reading, because you don't have to have finished it, but still, the things that we're reading right now.
All right, so introductions in order of the way we also talk about our books. And for whatever reason, I'm always like, me first. It's not because of an attention problem, I think. So I'm Gretchen. You may know me from this channel, maybe. I read a very weird spectrum of books, which is that you usually see me either reviewing smut or political science and history books, because that is the two sides of my brain. Typically for this reading roundtables, I bring like the weird side nonfiction that doesn't fit under my typical American history kind of vibe. And I'm super excited to bring a book today that I just wanted to read for me, and I didn't think anyone would ever hear me think about or talk about. But I have so many thoughts. So it turns out to be a really, really good thing. I am a PhD student in education, and I am in a very stressful period of my program right now, which means that my brain is not all the way connected. So I apologize. But I'm very excited to spend this evening with some of my favorite people.
Hi, I am Emily. I am primarily a fantasy and science fiction reader, but I do read a little bit of everything at this point. I try to diversify my repertoire as much as possible. I read a book by a Black woman author for this particular this meeting, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
And I am Anne, and I have been part of the roundtables for a while now. Whenever they show up, sort of happily latch on when Michaela or Gretchen send out invites. I read a whole lot of stuff. Lately, I've been reading, for lack of a better word, I don't even know if it's reading, but pottery books, because I've gone on a pottery kick at the moment, so that works. Gretchen and I used to work in the library together. We used to read what Gretchen determined her smut novels, and we had a great time and found some actually very good ones. For whatever reason, I've also been reading a lot of historical fiction written by women. And so tonight I'm bringing a book written by a white and a Black woman about an amazing historical character who was Black and passed herself off as white and did things, and I can't believe most of us will probably never have heard of her in our history lessons. So I can't wait to tell you about this, both the authors and the book.
Super cool. Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm on the other part of this channel, so you've probably seen my face around quite a bit. I usually talk about fan fiction on these, not always, but usually. I actually read a book for this one, so I'm going to be talking about a book. I read horror, fantasy, sci-fi, anything queer. You'll see me talking about it. I do literary fiction from time to time. This time I read romantasy, which is not normally a genre that I pick up when I'm reading my fantasy. It's not usually also romance. And I do read romance from the time to time. which does fall under urban fantasy a lot, but not in the same way that this one is. So, mine is by a Black woman author. I also hit both of the prompts with mine. So that's super awesome. And yeah, we're going to start with Gretchen with the nonfiction pit.
Listen, especially right now. I don't know what it is. I haven't even read a romance novel in like 2 or 3 weeks. Ever since I reviewed the new Fallon Ballard, I have not made an arc posting that I should have made. I've missed 2 now. But anyway, I did accomplish this. And while the author is a female author, I think the stories that she tells are very relevant to minority issues in Hollywood, actually. This is very out of my normal wheelhouse, but I heard about it, I think, on a podcast, and I really wanted to read it. So the book that I read is called Burn It Down: Power, Complicity, and a Call for Change in Hollywood by Maureen Ryan. The blurb on this is an expose of patterns of harassment and bias in Hollywood, the grassroots reforms underway, and the labor and activist revolutions that recent scandals have ignited. And so again, this is not like a normal thing that I would necessarily read. But when I first heard about it, they were talking about the work that Maureen Ryan did uncovering the racial and gender disparities on the set of the CW TV show, or was it CW Sleepy Hollow? And if you've never seen it, it ran for about 3 to 4 seasons. And it was a story of like Ichabod Crane comes back to life essentially 100 years later or more. And so he's like a Revolutionary era dude trying to exist in it's more than 100 years, but and then he meets up with Abby, who is an African-American police officer in the small town of Sleepy Hollow, and they essentially like team up to solve mysteries and crimes, but it's like very mythical, supernatural flair. And it was a really, really popular show. And one of the reasons was because so much depth and complexity was given not only to Abby, but also the police chief, I believe, was also an African-American gentleman. And Abby, there were like flashback scenes where you see one of Abby's ancestors who was enslaved interacting with Ichabod Crane's characters like in the same place. So it was just very like historically and culturally like diverse. And then Maureen Ryan tells the story of how like the actress who played Abby Mills was made out by the production for some reason to be difficult and hard to work with in ways that were not applied to her male white co-star, and like the disparities there, and the reasons why the gentleman who played the African-American police chief was initially like asked off the show because he was being written into a corner with his character. It talks about a lot of similar issues with Lost. This actually comes before the book, before Sleepy Hollow, but I'm not actually a Lost fan. I've never watched any. But Lost very famously had a large, diverse cast. And people will notice that as the series went on, more of the minority characters were pushed out and the stories of the white characters were fronted, and talks about all of that. And she interviews both people who were on the production and also some of the actors themselves about what happened to them. There are also stories of harassment, and particularly women, but not always women, being harassed and abused emotionally, mentally, physically, and how that was allowed to pass basically unchecked on a lot of these sets and different productions, and big names that you'd be familiar with that are not nice people. And so that was why I read this book, and I was fascinated by all of this. And I think, like I said, I think it fits the prompt really well, even if, she is not a person of color, because a lot of what she's paying attention to is the reasons why diverse stories aren't told in Hollywood. I loved the first half of the book. Okay. That was great. And then she transitions into like this call to action bit. And I don't want to say it's bad, right? Because she talks to psychologists, she talks to conflict managers, she talks to people like about ways to have accountability, right? And how justice and accountability, they don't look the same for everyone. And so like the difference between people who want the person who like assaulted them or attacked them to go to jail and people who go through a process of restorative justice, it's very different processes, right? So she talks about all of this stuff. The audience for the second half of the book is not the audience for the first half of the book.
Huh.
And here's why. All of the people that she's talking to in the second half, where she's talking about all of these like processes and different ways that Hollywood could change, or like, you know, that is for people in Hollywood who could then take these and enact them, right? But the whole front half of the book is all of these exposés that she makes very clear most of Hollywood already knew about, right? It's just that it was in the Hollywood circle and like the larger world didn't realize it was an issue. So I was just like, who is this a book for? Like who, like for me, I thought that the conflict, like all that stuff and like accountability and justice was interesting, but I cannot do anything with that information because it is tailored towards Hollywood. So towards the end of the book, I was so bored and I was just like, is it over yet? Is it over yet? Is it over yet? What I really liked the storytelling in the first half and the way that she was able to seamlessly stitch together different stories about different sets and stuff. The writing style was very different, you know, because she goes from like the storytelling to like the call to action format. And I was just like, this is such a weird book. So yeah, it's really hard to tell if I would even, like, I would recommend that if you read it, you could stop when it transitions, right? You would get like really interesting information and then you wouldn't, because like none of us work in Hollywood, right? So like, again, you may find some of that like restorative justice versus, you know, accountability versus this versus that interesting, but none of us can operationalize it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's such a weird, I don't think I've ever seen a book that bifurcated. Like in the middle, there's a switch and it changes. It was so odd. But I do think that the story is like, I loved Sleepy Hollow when it was on, and I, for the life of me as a fan, watching the way that the production ended up dealing with the two main characters and how their story shifted and changes. Now, when you hear what was happening behind the scenes, it makes a lot of unfortunate sense. So yeah, but just one of the weirdest things. So I'm glad to have a space to talk about it because I do think the story is important, but the book is written weird.
If there's any chance that it was written by one half is written by the author and another half is written by a ghostwriter?
No, I think it's because she's been a reporter like investigating this type of stuff for years and years and years. And I think it's very clear that it's very close to her heart and she really does want to see change happen. But she wrote 2 books and then went smoosh.
Mm.
And I don't know if it was because they wouldn't publish it without like the gossip or I don't know. It's really weird.
It feels weird to me because the people who have the power to do something about that in Hollywood wouldn't sit through the first half of that book either.
No.
So like if it is trying to enact change, like they're not gonna be amenable to being like, oh yeah, okay, you're dragging us through the coals, I'm gonna listen to you. Like that feels weird also, just like order. It's an interesting time that we live in because it's like post Me Too. I don't on my TikTok feed, I get a lot of things about former child stars talking about their experiences in Hollywood. And I think, is it HBO just put
Most
out
of
a
them are not
documentary?
good.
No. Yeah, I feel like HBO just put out a documentary on Dan Schneider, who was like a really big person on Nickelodeon, who was like doing some sketchy stuff.
Oh yeah.
In the 90s and early 2000s when we were like watching that stuff. So it's an interesting time for Hollywood where a lot of the like not really secrets of how people are treated in the industry are like very like harshly being brought to light in a way.
Coming back to bite them
Yeah.
at a point where they thought they were in the clear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's weird.
Yeah.
And I mean, she talks about how, you know, she probably could not have written this book, you know, pre Me Too. And, you know, and she also was saying that like the fervor around Me Too and everything, like with the Harvey Weinstein stuff and like there really being consequences is like now is the time for some of these actions. But yeah, I agree. The person who likes the first half has less to do with the second half, and the people who need to read the second half probably
Aren't
would
gonna
not read the first half. And I
Who's it for? What's it
Yeah.
trying to do?
That question, like it's really inappropriate for anyone, the whole thing.
yeah. I feel like
Interesting.
it's like because I teach freshman college writing, and I always tell them, think about your audience. I just want to give this book to them and be like, this is what happens if you don't have a clear idea of your audience.
Or if your audience changes halfway through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really, yeah, I mean, for people who might be interested in knowing some of these things, yeah, read the first half. But once that stops and you can return the audiobook to the library.
Good to know.
I wonder if it would be more popular in Hollywood. I don't know. We, as librarians, you always ask, who would want to read this book? Like, who would I give this book to? And your description of it is like, I don't really know anyone I'd give that book to, the whole thing. It's just.
Well, and all the press around it too, which is what got me to read it, was about like the section on Lost, the section on Sleepy Hollow, right? I heard nothing in any of the reviews about the second section.
That seems like it was very much on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the general audience cares more about that first half. The second half is a waste of time for most people to read.
And just because it is like so specific. Like it's not like, and we should all come together. Like it's like specific strategies and ways of being like, you know, having justice that are tailored for, you know, reporting or you know, having consequences like in Hollywood. So it's like it's not general. It is very specific.
Yeah.
Sounds like one of those manuals.
Too specific to map outward.
Yes, it's a manual. It's a too specific manual. Yes,
right.
You both are exactly right.
Yeah, like you can't, if you focus in too tightly on one specific situation, you end up employing a lot of like specificities in your approach that then cannot be mapped outward because you can't extricate all of those tiny little bits. Like it's too plugged in to then be moved, basically.
Yeah.
She probably would have been better served to take that like a full step or two back from her like action plan for Hollywood to express like, as an example, like this is a thing that Hollywood could do with it, but in general, like this is what the conversation is around restorative justice versus accountability versus like retributive judgment, like all of those things that can be really interesting. That's a really valuable topic for people to read about and to understand. But if you're going to do it that specifically, you do end up alienating everyone who's going to read your book, because like we've said before, like the people who are going to read the first half are not the people who are going to read the second half, and the people who need to read the second half certainly aren't going to sit through the first half.
Nope. Yeah.
So
weird book.
Weird, so weird. But I'm really glad. I think we decided on this prompt like I was like partway through this book, and I was like, yes. At the time, I thought it was going to be a very different review. But anyway, Emily, you're up next.
All right. Cool. So I read a book by Nnedi Okorafor. This one is called Remote Control. It was published in 2020. And it is an African futurist novel. And specifically African futurist, not Afrofuturist. Those are two separate things. And Nnedi Okorafor is very outspoken about that difference and cares very much about getting it right. So I'm getting it right. Remote Control is about a young girl named Fatima in Ghana who likes to look at the stars. It starts when she's very, very young. Really, it starts kind of when she's born. And she lives with her parents and then her grandfather. And her grandfather is super like in love with the stars, basically. And so when, as a toddler, she showed the same affinity for caring about the stars, he kind of took that and ran with it and was teaching her all of the constellations and showing her all of the things and how to map the stars and like find all of the things and do all of that stuff. But she was really she didn't really latch onto the constellations as much. Like she could find and identify them, but the constellations weren't what interested her. When she looked up at the stars, she was seeing patterns and she was even seeing words written in the layout of the stars, and she would recreate them large scale in the ground in her yard, basically. And so as she begins to like age up, and I'm still talking up to age 5 here, like we're in a very small window of a very small child. And she starts climbing this giant shea tree that they have in their yard. And she likes to be up there because she's closer to the stars. She can see better. She can see out further. She can see all of the places she can't go because she's a small child. And, you know, her options are limited inside the village. That's it. That's what she has. And one night while she is up there, there's a meteor shower and it draws like everybody out of their houses to look up at the sky, while one of them lands basically at the base of the tree that she's in, just right into the ground. So she climbs down the tree and finds this glowing green little stone seed situation. And she picks it up, and of course it burns her hand. So she drops it back onto the ground, and the ground swallows it up, just and it goes. Dirt just eats it and sends it down. And she's 4, so she forgets about it. And then eventually, while she's out at the tree another day, the ground kind of churns and up pops this tiny little wood box, very plain, just little wood box with the seed in it. And so she has this innate understanding that the tree has given her seed back, because it clearly it came to her. It was for her. And so she got this thing. So from there, this is where the conflict of the book really gets started. This is where the plot begins. The concept is that there is this American company doing all of this really essentially invasive business across Africa. And this is set way in the future. Far enough that referencing the plague of 2020 was like a historical fact. I would love for that to be true now, but here we are. Anyway, so these people show up at her house because they want this little seed thing, because clearly it is powerful of some sort or whatever. And so they come and they steal this box with this seed from her. And because she's 5 years old, her parents convince her that it's a good thing that they sold this little seed, and they'll give her like a pretty dress that she likes, and she'll forget about it and it'll be fine. So she decides to forget about it because you're 5. What are you going to do? Some white man showed up and stole your seed, and then someone stole it from him. So it's gone, right? So then after a while, probably another year or 2, she starts glowing. When she is in pain or when things are going wrong, she starts glowing green. And she, like, her brother knows about it, but she hasn't really told anybody else. And so her brother is like kind of basically making her do really cruel tests on it, basically. So like every time she starts to glow a little bit green, he like makes her grab like a wasp or a hornet in her hand to make it sting her to see like how bright she's gonna glow and whatever. And like the next step is to rub a chili pepper in her eyeball. And so like he's not very nice, but like it's very brotherly thing. Like having grown up with two brothers, even though they were not like horrible people, like that's a brother thing. Like, I'm sorry, that's just a brother thing. Anyway, so long story short, in the process of becoming who she becomes, she gets hit by a car in the village on the road, and because of this situation that she has gotten herself into, she glows green again and does not die. She's fine, basically. She's in pain, like her hip hurts and whatever, but she is not, she's fine. But when she like wakes up from her little trauma sleep thing, everyone around her in the village, everyone who had come to look, everyone who was in the vicinity remotely is sleeping. They're also strewn about the ground, sleeping. And she's 6. So she then starts like going back home, and she stops at the mosque on her way, and everyone in there is sleeping, including her dad, who had gone there to pray. So then she runs all the way home to find that her mother is also sleeping. And days go by, and of course it's hot in Ghana, and everyone begins to rot, and she is finally aware of the notion that everyone around her is dead and it's her fault, basically. And so she collects a couple of things from her house, and she sets off on foot and just starts walking across the bush. And that's kind of where the rest of this book goes. She is chasing down this seed. When she closes her eyes and focuses on it, there's like a little green light inside of her where she, like, it's a beacon. She knows where this thing is. And she's a 6-year-old on foot, so she can't catch up to it. I mean, she's somewhere in the range of 7, going into this space. So she is just this small child who glows green when things hurt her and kills people. And she is making her way across Ghana and then Africa. I don't know if she stays in Ghana or keeps going, but it gets to a point where the legend of her walks beside and follows her everywhere she goes. By the time she is 7 or 8 years old, everybody knows who she is. The other thing that's important that I forgot is that when she killed everybody, she forgot her name. So she took up the name Sankofa, which is a type of bird that her brother had like carved a little statuette of. And because that was what she found at the point where she realized she couldn't remember her name, that's kind of the name she took. So she is on this major journey, and across the course of time, people begin to know who she is. They recognize her, and the legends get big, and everyone knows a variation of it. But she is basically considered like an angel of death. She is the child of death. She is not dead, but she could just as well be. Like, death does not touch her, cannot touch her. Nothing can hurt her, period, because death decided so. So everywhere she goes, people give her what she wants. She gets the best fabric to make her clothes out of. They feed her the best food. She doesn't have to pay for things. They just give it to her. Whatever she needs, she's given because she is owed it. As far as she and the universe basically are concerned, she is owed the best of everything because she's doing this. And people would find her and ask her to ease the passing of loved ones who, for example, had cancer or whatever, are at the end in a painful situation where an end would be kinder. And she's still a child, like single-digit age child in all of this. It's a really long, complex journey. She goes through a lot of things. By the end of the book, she's, I think, 14-ish, still a child. And when everything wraps up, she remembers her name. And the end of the end of the book is really kind of dealing with the American company that came up throughout the course of it, and in a very small way that ultimately has a huge impact. And the major thread through this book that I was really digging and vibing with was just this notion of like coming into a power or a position or like a drive to do a thing that you never really had a say in. Like it's the concept of a enforced destiny, the thing that you cannot escape from, the path that your feet have touched down upon and now may not leave until it is over. And it doesn't matter how hard you run from it or hide from it, you have to finish this thing that you have started through whatever means. And there's a lot of like interaction with power and social respect and the nature of being other in a way that is both needed and revered and reviled and feared. And so she is this child who exists on her own, cannot step foot in a car, cannot touch technology, she kills it. She has to be like, when mosquitoes bite her at night, she glows softly and all of the mosquitoes are dead. So like, and that's really where it started, because she like got malaria so many times as a small child. And so like that was really kind of the start of this spiral and where this thing goes. And it's genuinely a really beautiful book. It's a delightfully short, compact read. Nydia Okorafor also really hates when people say it's really short, but it's really good, as if length is an indicator of quality. And I'm trying to be very careful not to make that implication, because I don't feel that way. I was really pleased with the length of this book because I read it in 2 hours. I'm a very fast reader. But like, it's very compact. It's very swift. It gets in and gets out and does the job. It's great. I think it's really fantastic, and it's a great way to spend an afternoon. I think it's a lot to think about. And there's a lot of really interesting like African culture in here as well. And I'm really drawn to the reimagining of a future of an Africa that was not pillaged and colonized, basically, over centuries, decades, what have you. So that's my book.
I haven't read this particular book, but I read her young adult stuff, like Akata Witch.
I have newer as well, which I have not yet finished reading, but need to.
Yeah, she's amazing, and I was lucky enough to hear her speak at a conference at Ithaca. And because she came to a Pippi to Ripley conference one year that I went back for, and I was just sitting there like, so amazing, like, because I mean, I mean, everything that you described is like amazing, and I can only like second that. If you have not yet, she writes these like more novella length things. She's written a YA. There's Akata Witch and Akata Warrior. I think it's a duology, actually.
There are 3 of them.
Is there 3 now?
I think there's 3, and then she has the Binti series as well.
Yeah, the Binti, I have that upstairs as well. I have not yet read Binti, but I have the other ones, and I have them signed. I have them signed by her. So yeah, I can only say that obviously Emily has made all of us want to read this particular book, but you could pick up any of her work and be amazed.
Transported. Truly.
It's so good. Yeah, and you were right. There are 3 Akata books. There's Akata Witch, Akata Warrior, and Akata Woman. So the main character of Akata Witch and Akata Warrior, her name is Sunny, and she's an American-born Nigerian girl who's also an albino.
Okay.
And I have it up on Goodreads. That's what I keep looking at.
Fair enough.
And yes, no, all 3 of the Akata books. It's Binti. Those are short stories. I know that for a fact because it's upstairs.
Got it.
But this one is all following Sunny, who starts the novel 12 years old. So like right on the cusp, but they're all shelved in young adult. So also for people who don't, I certainly wouldn't say that like her world building is any less in her YA books, but I will say that they definitely have like a different flavor, a different little bit of writing. Still amazing, but for people who, might want like that like magical kid trilogy situation going on at like a very different way.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I would classify Remote Control as YA, it didn't feel like YA to me personally. Like, yes, it's about a small child, but not all books about small children are children's books. So,
No. The Book of Lost Things. See
yeah.
here.
I could see it being shelved in YA, but I think it is actually just shelved in the fantasy section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. I also own Binti, but haven't read anything by Nydia Okorafor myself. So cool. Something
Maybe we'll have
on
to do
my TBR.
I was gonna say maybe we'll have to do Binti for a book club.
Yeah, we do both own it, so that'd be fun.
I think, Emily, is there any sense whether the sort of story arc, is this a traditional, I sort of wonder, is it an African story style? You know, how
Structure.
we have whatever.
Like versus a Buildings Roman.
Yeah, or versus the Snow White arc, or whether this is a familiar arc, because it doesn't sound, since it's set in the future, it doesn't sound like something familiar, but sort of, I don't know.
So if you break it down to its like barest scaffold, for me it feels a little bit closer to a heroine's journey than a hero's journey, because it's not really about like, it's partially about accomplishing a goal, but most of that goal is internal and like growth and understanding like herself and the role that she has to play in this scenario that she has found herself in. So it's kind of both. It might be also be like more of an African story structure. I'm not super familiar with any of those, like thematically or just like academically. So I don't know. But it does feel very much more in the line with a heroine's journey than otherwise.
It just makes me curious about, I've never heard of anything like this. This variation I've never, and it's like, where does it come from? What's its history?
Yeah. It's a very full circle narrative. It ends exactly where it began.
Right.
Which I also really loved.
Yeah. That's neat. Well, there's something else on the reading list.
All right, Anne, we'll take it away.
Well, take it away. I am going to talk about a book that I read a while ago and reread for our show, and it is called The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. Victoria is a Black author and Marie Benedict is not. So I think I've hit both categories I've hit many categories in the author department. And the book itself is about, I think the narratives are called a passing narrative or genre, where a Black person is passing as a white person, or, sort of is the use of the word passing. But it's just an amazing story. It's really well written. But it's a story about J.P. Morgan's personal librarian, Belle DaCosta Green. She's a Black American woman who passed herself off as white and ended up essentially creating or building J.P. Morgan's library, which is now I think it's the Pierpont Morgan Library. If you guys want to go read about her from the people who think she's very positive, that have nothing bad to say about this whole sort of the way promotional material about this amazing person, the Morgan library. I think it's called themorgan.org. So just go check it out and look up Belle Green. But anyway, this is in the time period. JP Morgan was a steel magnate. JP Morgan, big money, white society, New York, World War I and beyond. And race was not an acceptable issue in our country. But this woman got recommended by one of JP Morgan's cousins who knew her from Princeton. She came from her father's side of the family. He was the first Black person who graduated from Harvard. He was essentially threatened with lynching when the sort of situation against Blacks became much more livid and much more direct again I won't remember which university he was at, but the family essentially moved to New York. The wife decided to say that they were white, changed their name from Greener to Green. So that's just sort of the family history. And the father ultimately left the family because he just couldn't. He was a Black activist and he couldn't tolerate that their family was passing themselves off as white. So that's just the back.
Sorry, 1 second. Emily, was that your hand?
Yeah. Is this the same JP Morgan as like the financial institution?
Yes, this is the same JP as the financial institution.
Okay, just checking.
No,
thank you.
No, I guess what the story sort of in summary is, she was hired by JP Morgan to curate his collection of rare manuscripts and books. She ultimately became as a woman, became one of the most powerful book buyers of the time. So as a woman in a man's world, she was able to pull this off because Morgan believed in her and, supported her actions, and she's savvy and just amazing. But the fact that she was a Black woman doing this, JP Morgan died before. He certainly never knew. There were suspicions, at least in the novelized version of her life. Certain people suspected that she was Black, but no one was willing to bring that about. But it just amazes me that a woman was able to do this. 1910, 20, 30, 40s was able to make this happen. She was just amazing. Like, as a woman's story, it's astounding. As a Black story, it's astounding. She's a historical figure that I had never known about. So I just was floored. I shared this book I can't tell you how many people I've told about this book, and they've read it and they're going like, oh my God, we had no idea. So that's not a very good summary, but that's the summary of the book. It follows her life through, how she gets savvy about collecting. There are some amazing sort of themes that go through it. I think the whole question of feminism and what women weren't allowed to do, and intellectual Black families. And it's such a remarkable book. And I would encourage anyone, for Women's and Black History Month, this is just an amazing, it's fiction, it's fictionalized history, but it'll make you think.
I'm not a big historical fiction person. I feel like for me, a lot of it comes across as like, it's so many war books, and I get mad when it's like these are people falling in love, but also the Nazis are doing Nazi stuff. Like it bothers me as a reader. Like it just makes me mad. So then I just like write off all historical. I'm just like I don't like historical fiction, when really what it is like this one particular type of historical fiction.
Right. Michaela, I would say give it a try and
Okay.
see. I don't know, do the audiobook. It's it depends on what your best way of going through it. I also really appreciated the writing style. Her history comes back in flashbacks, so you learn about the family's struggle as the story is getting moving, and as the J.P. Morgan's cousin sort of knows her from Princeton, where she's a librarian, and ultimately works under him, and then gets hired by J.P. Morgan sort of to run her collection. In the 19 whenevers, she was earning, I think they said like $25,000 a year for a woman at that point. It was really quite extraordinary. If you look at photographs of her, or she was throwing on all sorts of suffragette things as well. She was an influential character. But it's well written. The author also, Marie Benedict, writes a lot of women's history, sort of fictionalized historical novels. The one I read most recently was The Other Einstein.
Mm-hmm.
The one who Einstein sort of bounced his ideas off of. But this may be one of my, I've actually got this book on my shelf. I don't get a whole lot of books on my shelf. So,
yeah.
Because I don't. I've had to move people's books out of their apartments, and I don't want to give that job to my kids. But this one I've got. So, for whatever that's worth. But it really is. It's a remarkable woman. It's a remarkable story for Black History Month. It's amazing that this wasn't included even in one of those little boxes in our history books. That there was this amazing human that did something that even in today's world sounds like it could be almost impossible for get this kind of position.
I'm so glad that you brought this. For people who don't know, I'm currently in the process of doing my comprehensive examinations, and a lot of what I am talking about is like master narratives versus counter narratives. And so master narratives being the master narratives of our history in this particular case, and like the things that we always know, and counter stories as a way to disrupt those master narratives, but also to bring a more holistic view of humanity. I'm thinking particularly in the classroom, but it certainly can just be a library shelf or your own life. My context is elementary social studies. But there's this, I'm going to get super academic, but it's actually, there's like a field of study called fugitive pedagogy. And it's basically, it is what it sounds like. It's like kind of like having to be underground to like get certain things to be known. And I was just reading an article about that vis-a-vis Nat Turner, who was a preacher and activist during the revolutionary times, but how sometimes literally these histories, like they are fugitives, and they are like underground. And so I was just thinking, like, what a great person, because eventually in my dissertation I'll be in the classroom, and I was like, what a great person, as someone who's also like a trained librarian, to bring into the classroom as a counter story. So I'm just going to put this in my back pocket, and maybe someday during my dissertation I'll whip out a unit or a lesson plan on this woman for poor unsuspecting elementary students who had me land in their classroom.
But it is remarkable. It was one of those, and however, whatever your sense is about, or perspectives are on, fictionalized history and whatever, but this one, it made me learn about a person that I had never heard of. I didn't really even know a whole lot about J.P. Morgan. I still don't really, because he wasn't all that, he is important in the book, and he's
but it wasn't about him.
Who cares about you? You had no idea, you dimwit.
Get your own biography, man.
Oh God, do you know how many? I'm sure. Like,
I'm sure there's ones out there. I'm sure
Oh,
he has his own.
I'm sure there's too many. There's
Yeah.
too many.
But it
As
left
someone
me
who for a while specialized in biographies of dead white men.
yes,
There's too many.
It's too many, right? But I think the fascinating thing about this book also for me is how many things it sort of resonated with. It like reflected, for me anyway, a lot of our society and a lot of the struggles that we still talk about. And how many stories we don't know ultimately. How many other people were there that managed this sort of thing that history just never let come to the surface?
So many.
Many.
I know.
So many.
Whatever sort of non-mainstream part of society you look at, be it women, cats, you know, it's amazingly insane. That's my recommendation, guys. I apologize for not being as adept at speaking or describing books, but this one,
No, it was good.
You did a great job, man. What are you talking about?
it altered the way I thought afterwards about things we don't know and history. So Gretchen, it's to your fugitive stories. It's like, God.
If you
And then
want more stories about passing in particular, Taylor, Emily's wife, and I, our African American studies class in college was an entire course on passing as the theme. So that was super interesting. And the highlight from that course that I had was the two novellas that Nella Larson wrote. One is called Passing Literally, and like that's the main theme of the story, but she focuses a lot on that thematically, like what it's like to sort of not exist in either world in the same
Right.
way, because you aren't white and you're trying to pass as white, and so you can't interact with your culture in the way that you would normally. And then when you do try to interact with your culture with people who know that you're Black, they sort of think that you look down on them because you're able to pass as
Right.
white, and there's privilege that comes with that.
And
So
like
yeah,
weirdly, also the novella that Michaela and I just read for the Alphabet Roundtable read for the Literary Gladiators channel, which should be out. I don't quite know when that our video is going up, but we'll link it when we can. We reviewed a novella for them, which was set in a fantasy world, but dealt with passing and
Passing.
also Bible fan fiction.
Bible fan fiction, yeah.
For how Michaela described it. So, Tread of Angels by Rebecca Rowanhorse.
Still have it on my desk.
Right there.
This one.
We just read that.
This is an Indigenous author, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna bring it around with some whimsy, which is what I want to do every time we do these, and talk about That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming, which is romantasy. And I believe I messaged Taylor and Emily when I bought this because I was excited about it, because one, there's a Black lady on the cover, which is so rare in the fantasy genre, just in general. The author is also a Black woman. What I didn't know when I picked it up was that this was originally self-published and then eventually later got picked up by Orbit, and Orbit has now republished the 3 books that she had already written. They came out like once a month, like January, February, March, like all 3 of those are out now. And they all feature characters of color. This was pitched to me as cozy fantasy, and I want to start off by saying this is not cozy fantasy. I would not consider this cozy fantasy. It is romantasy, like it's definitely like romance at the heart, and like that's there. But I think that some people confuse like happy ending with cozy. There is a lot of violence throughout this book, and a book that the main narrative centers around an entire race of people being subjugated and enslaved. Not cozy. not a cozy book. So if
It's
you're
not cozy.
if somebody said, hey, this is a cozy book, it's not. It is romantasy. It's not grim dark, and it's not epic fantasy. So like if you're looking for light fantasy, it is your like generic fantasy taverns, magical creatures type thing. Like you don't really need to care about the setting so much, just generic fantasy setting. But yeah, that's there. I just want to start off by saying that because it was like mispitched to me. This follows our protagonist is Cinnamon. That's her name. Her best friend is Bree. Cinnamon is a spice farmer and Bree is a cheesemonger. So if you aren't down with the jokes already, this probably isn't a book for you because it's got that sort of like on the nose, tongue-in-cheek sort of style.
I'm sorry, did you not get that from the title?
That's what I'm saying. It's like you need to come into this book being like, this is whimsical and fun. It is not serious fantasy. That's not what this is doing. In the same way, I'll also say people who get bothered when modern slang or like incongruous thing, like they mentioned nachos at one point. If you don't like that in your fantasy books, don't pick this one up. It's not gonna be for you. Which again, the second book has the word yeeted in the title. So like if you're not down for that, don't pick up this series.
It's got people in a tizzy about it too.
I know there are hardcore fantasy people who are like, you can't, it's a fantasy world. They don't have the same like references that we do. And I'm like, just have fun. It is a silly, fun book. That's what this is here to do. But it follows Cinnamon. The book opens up on like a big like town-wide revelry, because the god of this land has chosen her 4 champions, and one of the people in their town got picked, and Cinnamon's just happy it's not her because she does not want to be a hero. She just wants to farm her spices and live a normal life and eat cheese and drink and hang out with her family and her friends, which is like what most of us want to do. Unfortunately for Cinnamon, on her way home, a little bit tipsy from this huge party that everybody's having, she finds what she thinks is a dude who's been trapped under some like rubble. There was like a weird explosion that happened right before she left, and she pulls this guy out. Turns out this is the demon that, or one of the demons that the champions were chosen to keep out of the land because that's what the god does. Except he tells her, no, actually, your god is a lich and they're enslaving all of the demons, and her magic is what makes them crazy and bloodlusty. They aren't normally like that. And it was just used so that the lich could keep her power base and enslave this entire race of people. So then he enlists Cinnamon to go with him to stop the lich. For some reason, the smell of cinnamon breaks this lich's magic, which is like a really weird loophole. But Cinnamon the spice, not Cinnamon the person, because that could be
Convenient.
I know. But
Let me just get really sweaty and walk.
Yes, let me just like wipe my bodily fluids all over all these demons. No, it's Cinnamon the spice. So yeah, that's sort of where this is going. And again, it's a romance at its heart. It is romantasy, so it's the guy falls first type thing. She's kind of wary of him because she has the societal thing of like demons are violent and stuff. And he is violent. There's a point where like somebody like bumps into her and he like breaks their arm immediately for like bumping into her. And she's like, don't stop, don't hurt people. Like, we can't just be harming people because they hurt me. There is a scene later where somebody goes to try to assault her and she goes, you can kill the rapist. The rapist, I will let you kill the rapist. That guy, kill him. That's fine. But this other guy, that was an accident. He didn't deserve that. But it was fun. You can definitely tell that this was self-published. Like if I didn't know that it was self-published previously, I probably would be a little bit more critical about some of the things in here. And I know like part of me, when I see things like this where they get picked up by a traditional publisher, I'm like, it gives you an opportunity to get an actual editor to like go in and like fix these things. But then I also understand the argument of if you read the book self-pubbed and then you pick up this and it's like completely different. it doesn't drive, like it doesn't work. But if you go into it knowing, okay, this was self-published, like there's definitely some like editing quirks and things. It's like a 3.5, 4-star book for me. I enjoyed it. I'm gonna read the other two. It's fun. If you just want something fun, go for this. I would recommend it. It was super cool.
I
Not
just
fan
love, I
fiction.
love the titles. I feel like that's a really excellent way to like that's what I mean, that's what a title is supposed to do, but particularly those is like, if you don't get the joke of the title, don't read the
Yeah,
book.
you're not
It's
gonna
not
jive with
for
this.
you.
It
It was
definitely sets the mood. Like it tells you exactly what kind of book this is going to be right from the cover.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like one of those things where I know that most of the speculative genres are constantly fighting back with academia, considering them not like serious literature. But sometimes you just want to have fun with your fun books. And that's what this is doing. It's being like, no, this is for entertainment. This is not for necessarily like it's talking about slavery. There's definitely like allegories that have to do with what it's like to be like prejudice against somebody. All the demons obviously have a huge prejudice going towards them in the world. It's not like it's not talking about that stuff, but it's not the point to make you like learn something, which sometimes you just want entertainment. Sometimes that's what's good about stuff.
Right.
I don't know. Recommend it.
Yeah, having, pursued both an English degree and then a publishing degree, like I feel and experience the literary fiction disdain for genre fiction very acutely. I have felt that across the course of my career. Obviously I think it's ridiculous. There is, as a science fiction fantasy main reader, like I have read so many books that are so incredibly well crafted, and they are, exploring these really complicated and in-depth themes, and they're doing it so beautifully. And there are so many like wonderful examples of literature that are buried in the genres that literary fiction thinks don't matter. And I think it's an important conversation to have, that like it doesn't matter if you're like playing with some of the trappings of a genre, like it can still be high literature.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that doesn't exclude us from being able to write silly little schlock like this. Like the point of every single book cannot be to challenge and to discomfort and all of the things. Like sometimes you just need a book that you can sit down and read in 3 hours that's just going to make you giggle the whole time.
Yeah. It's just, I feel like it's just like the like personality judgment that comes from like, from me telling people that I read romance, and they're like, but you're a PhD student. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And?
Two things can be true at the same time. And it's like, it's not like literary fiction is one audience.
Yeah.
Right.
It's one audience. It's like, Michaela and I have a challenge on our buddy reading challenge this year to read a book that was up for an award. And I was like, as long as it's not the Man Booker. The Man Booker is considered one of the most prestigious literary prizes of like all of literature. I have hated all but two, and I wouldn't say I enjoyed them, I respect them, books that have been up for the Man Booker.
Right.
Because that book is a single type of audience that is actively not me. And it's just like when you tell like the literati that you're like, no, I can't do the Man Booker, they're like, but that is the deepest literature. And you're like, for you.
The Booker has that added caveat of it being a British award, so it gets extra snobby, and they don't like it when American books get added to the list for the Booker. So like Booker's got its own thing going.
Yeah, I mean,
I have enjoyed Booker like shortlist and long list books, but I it definitely is.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Unless you're Kazuo Ishiguro, I have nothing to say to you. They're always so sad. I can't. Why? And this is why literary fiction has like the monopoly basically on like sad.
Yeah.
And just like depressing sad. right? I'm not saying that other books can't be sad, but like there's something also to literary fiction that also demands like a depressing, like reevaluate your life thing. And like, listen, if there is enough of that in my real life, I don't want it in my books. I want them to kiss. So we could talk so much more about this and so many other books, and I would talk to these amazing people for 4 hours straight. But we do recognize that eventually we do have to go so that we have content for the next reading roundtable. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you certainly pick up anyone's book but me. Unless my book is what you're interested in, but there was some amazing, amazing literature of all different types for all different kinds of readers brought up today. And that's why these reading roundtables are such a joy, because I think we all added stuff to our TBR today and heard and learned something that we didn't know before. So thank you again to Emily and Anne for joining us tonight. Michaela and I will be back for another review in a number of weeks. This got pushed back and I'm going on a trip, so we're not quite sure when this is going to come out, but we are really excited. There is a book coming out called Really Cute People, and it is a contemporary poly romance. Normally when Michaela and I find our poly rep, they're usually in like a fantasy and also usually like in a dark fantasy as well, because
Or kinky in some other way.
yeah, it's usually attached to like fantasy kink situations, and this is just like a genuine like contemporary setting with a poly couple, and we are very hopeful for this book and some awesome rep and you know, just like a real life, it happens, you know. Doesn't have to be in a fantasy book, it can be in real life.
Real people are poly too.
Shocking. Oh my gosh. So we are really excited to review that one together. And then after that, we also have another ARC review coming up next month that is called Here We Go Again. And it is a lesbian road trip. And I believe that was exactly how I believe the blurb that I saw was like the most lesbian road trip you'll ever read. And Michaela said yes. So we have that arc as well, followed by another reading roundtable in April with an open theme. So that is our plan for our next couple of meetings, plus Michaela and I's individual content when we can. But we're really, really excited for all of this awesome stuff coming up, and we will see you then. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.